punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question.
That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon and welcome to the discussion which explores the moral implications of the stories that matter to you. I'm delighted to be joined in this studio throughout the show by journalist and commentator Ella Whelan. We have lots of big discussions coming up across the programme, but first, it's the bulletins. Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock, the top stories from the GB newsroom. NATO Secretary-General says Turkey isn't looking to block Finland and Sweden's plans to join the alliance, and he's confident an agreement can be reached. His comments follow Finland confirming it will apply for NATO membership, despite President Putin warning that it would be a mistake. Jens Stoltenberg also believes Ukraine can win the war against Russia.
Russia's war in Ukraine is not going as Moscow had planned. They failed to take Kiev. They are pulling back from around Kharkiv. But Ukraine stands. NATO is stronger than ever. Europe and North America are solidly united. Ukraine can win this war.
The Prime Minister will urge Northern Ireland's politicians to get back to work after the DUP blocked the election of a Speaker in the Stormont Assembly. Boris Johnson will travel to Belfast tomorrow for crisis talks, where he'll say parties must come together if problems with the protocol are to be fixed.
We have been talking here in Finland at least 30 years about NATO membership. When we talk about security, even if it's not that visible in daily life, it has a huge impact in our minds, and that makes this decision also historic.
Nearly 8,000 people have crossed the Channel and entered the UK this year. The latest Ministry of Defence figures show 13 boats carrying 167 people were intercepted yesterday. The Home Office is warning asylum seekers they could be flown to Rwanda under its new resettlement scheme, with flights expected to start in the coming months. British mountaineer Kenton Cool has successfully completed his record-breaking 16th summit of Mount Everest. The 48-year-old reached the summit overnight, marking the highest number of climbs by a non-Sherpa. Well, you're up to date for now, but plenty more on all the main stories at the top of the next hour. Welcome back to the discussion. Now, in this week's edition of In Focus, we are looking at the Northern Ireland Protocol in light of, for example, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss potentially scrapping parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I'm really excited to be joined in the studio, firstly by Kevin Rooney, to get some reaction to what he thinks about this particular subject. Thank you so much for joining me, Kevin. Firstly, could you just tell me your reaction to the potential of Liz Truss scrapping parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol?
A wry smile. I don't take her seriously. I think that, the machinations in the Tory party and the cabinet between different positions on the protocol is neither here nor there. There's a far bigger problem, and it's not the protocol, it's the union. And a lot of viewers might not realise this, but you're never going to solve the protocol problem until you face up to the problem of the union. And ever since the Good Friday Agreement, whether people in Britain like it or not, or Boris Johnson, a foreign power has a say in the affairs of Northern Ireland. And that foreign power is the Irish government. And as they're part of the EU, they also have a say. And that was the price that Britain decided to pay for an end of the conflict between the IRA and the British. Now, that's the Gordian knot that ties Britain to a situation where they cannot have full sovereignty in the north of Ireland, and they never will. So you can play around with semantics and you beat around the mulberry bush with a protocol. I can guarantee you this issue will not be solved.
Well, but in terms of the perspective of sovereignty, isn't this a simple kind of black and white issue in relation to, for example, the European Union trying to erode British sovereignty? Because there is, for example, potentially a border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, and that is causing a lot of tensions, and the UK wants to scrap parts of it. And actually that's what is seemingly a significant part of Northern Ireland want as well.
The British don't enjoy full sovereignty in the north of Ireland. Mrs Thatcher once said that the north of Ireland was as British as Finchley. It's not. If you look at the election, Inaya, half of the population have voted for pro-United Ireland parties. Thus, you have a situation where Britain doesn't enjoy full sovereignty or legitimacy in the north of Ireland. That's the problem that you have to grasp. There is a way around that, Inaya, and the way around that is an Irish border poll. Let the people speak and let's see what they say.
OK, well, bringing more reaction from other perspectives on this issue, I'm really delighted to also be joined by Carlo Brabber, writer and Professor of Creative Writing at Trinity College London. Thank you so much for joining me, Carlo. I mean, what do you make of some of the things that Kevin has outlined there, potentially that this is, we need a border poll, and that actually is the question of the union, which is the bigger question, not just the question of the Northern Ireland Protocol?
What do I think? Northern Ireland was an artificially created state. It was created in order to guarantee a permanent Protestant majority. The British did that. That was their work in order to settle the war that was going on in Ireland in the 1920s. And it was pretty awful for the minority population. In fact, it was really, really horrible. They did not enjoy the same rights or advantages as everybody else. I'm talking about the Catholics. This then leads to what we euphemistically refer to as the Troubles, which was people in England sort of think, well, it's just the kind of, mad paddies, kicking off, causing trouble. People only resort to the kinds of violence that the IRA resorted to because they feel they've no other alternative, whether you like it or not. And the Troubles also was a three-sided conflict, not a one-sided conflict. I mean, what I mean is it had three sides. It had the British Army, it had loyalism and loyalists, and it had Republicans. And it was a complete and utter disgusting mess that festered and rumbled and just went on for nearly 30 years until the Good Friday Agreement solved it. And now what you have is 25 years later, the people who are the beneficiaries of the Good Friday Agreement, the nationalist population, have given, they're not all Sinn Féin supporters, but they have given Sinn Féin a majority in Stormont. I mean, not a majority, but they're the largest party. They have 27 seats to the DUP's 25, and therefore they're entitled to First Minister post. But more importantly, in terms of the protocol, what has really happened is membership of the EU, Europe has been turned into a sectarian issue. So Catholics, generally speaking, like it. Some Protestants like it too. And Protestants, generally speaking, don't like it. We have enough problems here without adding attitudes to the EU to the list of sectarian grievances that animate our society. And finally, because we are a sectarian society with these inbuilt, baked-in animosities, differences of opinion have a nasty habit of becoming violent. So already, not much, but already there's been a bit of bus burning about the protocol and a bit of just unpleasantness and unpleasant rhetoric. And apparently the Prime Minister is going to come tomorrow and put everybody in their box. He's a man who has lied to the DUP and, insulted. Well, he certainly insulted people in the South. His famous remark, why is he called Varadkar? I thought all the Irish were called
Carlo, I mean,
Carlo,
how do we go forward? I mean, you mentioned the troubles and the kind of tumultuous history that has really led us to the point that we are today. But how do we move forward in order to prevent violence re-erupting in the area?
Well, your previous speaker, Mr. Rooney, I hope I've got his name correct, suggested a border poll. Kevin, yes. I mean, and obviously that's what Sinn Féin, well, theoretically, that's their long game, but Sinn Féin are being incredibly adroit. They are focusing on the cost of living crisis. They are not talking about a united Ireland, well, in the immediate future. They have mentioned maybe 5 or 10 years of border poll. If you want to resolve this problem, the very first thing you do is stop, if you're the British government, being rude and obdurate. You make friends with people.
What's your reaction to that?
I think I agree in part with him, but don't be afraid of democracy. A border poll, I mean, Brexiteers go on about democracy and sovereignty, and I have a lot of sympathy for Brexit with people in Britain.
Did you support Brexit?
I support Brexit in the sense of a sovereign nation should be able to enjoy the ability to run its own affairs. But let me be very clear.
But a united Ireland will be in the European Union.
Let me be very clear. In the context of Northern Ireland, a bigger problem than being in the EU is the connection with Britain. The connection with Britain has been the source of Ireland's troubles for a couple of hundred years, since Wolfe Tone of the United Irishman.
But there's not a majority for that yet, even.
Oh, I love it. OK, there's not a majority. And I would hear this here from the election. Check your figures. They gerrymandered the northern state to ensure a permanent unionist majority, so they made it to 6 counties, not the 9 of Ulster. 4 of the 6 counties last week voted the majority pro-unity parties. Belfast and Derry, the 2 biggest cities, voted pro-unity parties. There are more MPs in the north of Ireland who are pro-unity. And by the way, on the protocol thing, I think the protocol is a side issue to the bigger problem of the union. Most representatives elected were for the protocol. Now, I don't want to get sucked into the protocol, but here's the question. The union has a problem, and Brexit supporters in Britain shouldn't see people like me, United Irelanders, as a problem. I support British sovereignty, but I say to British people, let the Irish people enjoy our sovereignty too. Give us a border poll.
What if they supported staying in the union?
I'll be gutted, but I'll go quiet. I'll be gutted, I'll go quiet for a while, and then I'll gather my thoughts and try to persuade them later on down the line.
And what's your reaction to the conversation we've just been having, Ella?
I think if you want to look at the way in which democracy is treated in Ireland, you could do worse than look at the way in which the DUP has handled the response to the election. Because, at the end of the day, having gone into an election fairly and with the knowledge that there would be this power-sharing agreement at the end of it, the DUP has decided to throw its toys out the pram and demand that Westminster comes and that Boris Johnson comes in and gets involved and kind of gives everyone a ticking off around the table and changes things about the protocol. So that is withholding losers' consent in an election, and it tells you something about the way in which Kevin is right. If you go back through the history of the way in which the Northern Irish state was set up, it was set up on the basis of an undemocratic system of power-sharing agreement that was never going to be viable. The mess of Northern Ireland is it's very difficult to fix one thing, tweak a protocol here or do something there without recognising that Britain and its, the British states control Northern Ireland historically is the thorn in the side of democracy. So Kevin is right, the only solution is a border poll. And I wouldn't poo-poo the idea of, there's lots of people who have been picking apart the stats and, there has been people pointing out that, yes, Sinn Féin hasn't had this storming victory. It's not absolutely clear. But don't play down, number one, the significance of a Republican getting into the position of First Minister for the first time ever, and the significance that has. But also there are elections coming up in the South, and that will paint a much clearer picture of where the country, the island of Ireland, is at. And it becomes increasingly day by day more awkward for British politicians in Westminster to try and say that there is no space for a border poll and try and say that there is, having just gone through the exciting process of Brexit and sovereignty and all of that, with a war in Ukraine over sovereignty and all the rest that's happening over Europe, to deny Irish people their chance at sovereignty.
Kevin, some people would say that is there really a kind of groundswell of movement advocating for this right now? Because you've always supported this. You've always supported a united Ireland. That you will put that into any issue when Northern Ireland comes up. So is it really fair to kind of make that kind of?
And you're absolutely right. By the way, guilty as charged. But this is an unstoppable conversation about a united Ireland. The bus has left the station and it ain't stopping. And what's fascinating about the election just gone, it's PR election, so you transfer your votes. Yeah. So you've got the Unionists on roughly speaking 40%. You've got the United Irelanders on roughly speaking 40%. Then you've got the Neithers, the undecided, the Alliance people. Look at the transfers, fascinating. The Electoral Office of Northern Ireland just released the data. By 2-1, Alliance voters have transferred to pro-United Ireland parties in that election last week. I am so excited. The grounds for optimism if a border poll comes is so
it certain
strong.
that they were voting on the basis of a united Ireland? And some people have been talking about the cost of living and all sorts of other issues. And actually, maybe the DUP, their fixation on the Northern Ireland Protocol, actually potentially lost them votes.
I think you're sharp. That's a good point you make. You're very sharp about the cost of living. There's that word in chess, and I always get it wrong, called zugzwang. And it's when you try to make a move in the chess game, and every move you make, it brings you closer to defeat, and you get checkmated. Every decision the Unionist parties have made for the last few years has been zugzwang, and they're doing our job for us.
But is that not a similar thing when we see when it comes to Scotland, that actually those that support the union have failed to make the case for the union itself? And that's not necessarily because the union is something that needs to be unravel or disintegrate, but because people are struggling within the British political class more broadly to be able to justify its own existence.
And do you know what? That's a really, really good point. I think there's a problem with the union. You're not going to believe this, well, you will maybe believe it. Most of my friends in London are actually Brexit supporters in London, which is supposed to be a big Remain place. They all concede, though. They rarely hear a positive argument for the union. So the British political class, beyond the Tories, are struggling. And I do think, I'm not trying to be cocky and condescending, but it feels to me that the union is on life support. Gramsci once made that famous point, and I don't know the whole phrase, it was something like, something is dead, the new is yet to be reborn. See, in the context of the north of Ireland, I do think the union is dead, but the new is yet to be reborn. So there will come a moment when we get put under much pressure, us United Irelanders, because we have to put the arguments on the table as to why United Ireland's better. Right now, I do think unionism is making our life quite easy by the ridiculous decisions they make, which is pushing a lot of moderate middle ground people towards looking at the idea of United Ireland for the first time.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin Rooney. And just a final word from you, Carlo, about what your reaction is to what we've just been talking about. Do you think that there is anything about the union that is worth saving?
Well, saving, that would be things like the National Health Service. Can it be saved? I fear not. Your previous speaker is absolutely correct. I mean, he lives in London. I live here. And I've lived here for the last 30 years. And, you can detect, I live in Northern Ireland, I work in the South. And you can detect that there is this extraordinary shift in the tectonic plates. So in the South, it is more than likely that Sinn Féin are going to form the next government. Not quite certain with who, they won't get an outright majority, possibly in conjunction with Fine Gael. Fine Gael they will provide the next Taoiseach. Varadkar is absolutely clear that he's going to start agitating for supporting a shared island. That's what they talk about when they mean unity in the south. Up here, you can just tell because of Brexit, people have really, a lot of people, they're fed up with the British government. This is a place of decency, and a lying, hectoring prime minister really doesn't play well, like he doesn't play well in Scotland either. And the Alliance Party does not, it's neutral on the subject of unity. So that's why when Kevin said the second votes went from Alliance, the majority of them, across to Sinn Féin, probably within the party there is, on balance, a support of unity, but they haven't come out because they don't want to alienate their unionist supporters. And there is, the place is changing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carlo, and also Kevin. Thank you so much for joining me. Originally, we were going to have a DUP, or a pro-union voice, but that didn't work out. But hopefully next time, if we have this debate again, we can have two sides or multiple sides of this discussion. But after the break, we'll be discussing the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, the conflict in Ukraine, and taking a look at some of the stories that you might have missed. But first, take a look at the weather. Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy at times. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and it'll be a mostly dry evening with plenty of warm, sunny spells, although cloudier in the east where an odd, sharp shower is possible. The southeast will be rather cloudy and feel warm and muggy. There'll be a few showers with further heavy, thundery ones arriving from the south. South Wales will be cloudy with outbreaks of showery rain turning heavy at times. It'll feel rather muggy with some hill fog likely. It's a similar story across the Midlands as we end the day, a rather cloudy picture with showers which could be heavy at times. Muggy here with some murky conditions over the hills. The northeast of England will end the day mostly dry but also rather cloudy. There will be some bright or sunny spells, and an isolated shower is also possible towards the south. Little changes as we head north to southern Scotland. It remains mostly dry but rather cloudy. The odd shower is possible along with some brighter spells, feeling warm for most. It'll be a rather cloudy but pleasantly warm evening across Northern Ireland too, although with some brighter spells likely. Mostly dry here with only an isolated shower possible. So a muggy feeling across the night will follow for many, especially in the south where there will be further heavy thundery showers. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back. This week, Labour Party leader Keir Starmer vowed to resign if he is fined for breaching COVID rules. Quickly, speculation arose over who could replace him, leaving many wondering whether Starmer will really be missed if he resigns, as he continues to struggle to articulate what he really stands for. In this week's review, we ask, who is Keir Starmer? Well, I'm joined now by Simon Evans, comedian and broadcaster. Thank you so much for joining me, Simon, this afternoon. I mean, what's your reaction, first of all, to the whole Partygate and Beergate affair? What do you think about it all?
Well, you know, I've been presenting headliners on GB News since October of last year, and when this started to rumble up, at first it did feel like Partygate might be a mortal blow to Johnson, and then he toughed it out with his unique brand of sort of ebullient evasion. And it quickly became quite tiresome. It quickly became repetitive. It felt as if he did not respond to the usual expectations of honour and so on that would be expected from a prime minister. Then it was turned back on Starmer that there was some sort of degree of hypocrisy on his part, that he had been as culpable of misbehaviour or not observing the letter of the law, at any rate, in his own activities whilst on the campaign trail. This gave, I think, some people a great deal of sort of schadenfreude. But realistically, from my point of view, I've got to say I'm just absolutely exhausted by the whole thing. It feels so petty, trivial, and worthless a thing for our attention to be focused on at a time when we're confronting, you know, military catastrophe over in the east, and then a cost of living crisis, fuel prices spiralling out of control, and all sorts of very serious domestic political issues which need resolving and which need the full attention of our political and our journalistic class as well. And they seem to be preoccupied with this very much to the detriment of the national mood, I think, if I'm honest. I would prefer to see efforts made to possibly offer actually some sort of degree of reparation or apology or amnesty, or whatever you might want to call it, to people who were caught up in the absurd overreach of the police powers a couple of years ago and were given absurd and huge fines for what amounted to, you know, minor misdemeanors in truth, rather than trying to use that as a stick with which to beat the leader of the opposition at this point.
I mean, what do you make of Keir Starmer saying that he will resign if he is fined? I mean, do you think that is the right approach, or do you just think that is a bit bizarre?
I think it might be a very clever political calculation, although, you know, he is an extraordinarily uncharismatic and frankly, rather uninspiring, even boring person to listen to. I have to acknowledge, I think he, especially as a sort of, with his legal training and so on, he might have some tactical nous here. Essentially, he has presented a scenario which shifts the moral duty back onto Johnson to do the same. If he is not fined, he can then turn around legitimately and say, well, I was willing to do so. I think now you have to do so because you were fined. You've been fined. Your whole team has been fined. Everyone who you've ever met, touched, or known has been sort of caught in this big struggling net, and that is quite a clever tactical, strategic effort on his part. But again, unfortunately for him, and perhaps unfortunately for the entire country, Johnson just doesn't seem to acknowledge that kind of mode, that the responsibilities of fair play. I mean, I wouldn't exactly say it's like playing chess with a pigeon, but it has elements of that. When you're trying to trap Johnson into some sort of it feels like a queen sacrifice, essentially. To continue the chess metaphor, and I'm not sure that Johnson will observe the rules of the game.
If Keir Starmer does resign, I mean, what do you think he will be remembered for? Because, I mean, it has been quite a difficult last few years for him, obviously having to deal with the fallout from Jeremy Corbyn, and then he kind of followed along with Boris Johnson a lot when it came to the lockdown and so on. He hasn't had the opportunity to really define himself, and even when he hasn't really found his feet in terms of really articulating what he stands for.
Well, I think that's been the story of the last 2 years of politics generally, hasn't it? We emerged out of Brexit finally in sort of January 2020. Johnson got Brexit done. We were all sort of taking a deep breath and ready for the next stage. Coronavirus came in, and to be honest, I don't think Keir Starmer offered very much of any interest in his response to that. He seemed mainly, from my point of view, to be critiquing the government from the wrong side, generally speaking, demanding more draconian measures and so on, which is one reason why I think people might feel some degree of justification in being pleased to see him hoist by his own petard on that front. But I mean, there's not been a great deal of evidence of personality from the government either. I voted Tory in 2019, and I've been very disappointed with the lack of any real focused programme or demonstration of Tory principles, Conservative principles. And I think a lot of people voted who saw Corbyn on the way out were pleased to see that what amounted to even putting the anti-Semitism to one side, which remains a very sort of fiercely debated topic. There was definitely a sense that was a hard left and very nearly like a student sort of vision of what left-wing politics amounted to. And still Starmer had to reassert a degree of balance and a broader church. I think he may have satisfied some people that he's rooted out the rot, but I don't think many traditional Labour voters feel as excited about him as they did about Corbyn, or that he has engaged the wider populace as well as Blair did. So he has arguably fallen between two stools on that front. And I'm not a traditional Labour voter myself, but there's plenty I know that I talk to, and they are far from convinced that he's managed to kind of reassert the right of Labour to be considered a party in waiting, a government in waiting. So yeah, I think he probably has failed on, to be brutal about it. But having said that, I'd be very surprised if he does face a fine. I do think it's placed an extraordinary and quite unfair degree of burden on whichever poor officer of the police force is now essentially has the future of the British, political system on his hands in determining whether to issue Keir Starmer with a 50 quid fine. I mean, that's a ridiculously sharp point on which the whole edifice is now balanced.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Simon Evans, comedian and broadcaster. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, giving his reaction on Keir Starmer and the fallout from Beergate. I mean, Ella Whelan, journalist and commentator, is still with me in the studio. What's your reaction to what's gone on with Keir Starmer over the last few weeks?
I think Simon's right in that Keir Starmer he's not just particularly uncharacteristic. He is someone with no personality and no policies. I mean, because I think we can get into sort of dodgy ground when we suggest that the only thing voters go for is the dramatics of a performance. And I think a lot of people mistakenly think that that's why people vote for Boris Johnson, ignoring the Brexit stuff and everything else that was going on in 2019. But even if Keir Starmer was a showman, the Labour Party's policies have veered from trying to ride on the back of the Corbyn wave to then now successively kind of moving away from anything that smells vaguely left-wing to, basically riding the last 2 years on saying, I'm not anti-Corbyn, I am anti-Corbyn, and I'm, and get that kind of, that label away from us. And he's successfully done that. But then at a time when we were crying out for an opposition throughout the pandemic, and I really think too many apologies and excuses are made for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, he studiously decided to basically follow in the footsteps of Boris Johnson. But I think the broader picture is, even if Starmer goes, and it would be wildly ridiculous for him to go over a PCN. I mean, that really is a pathetic end to a pathetic politician, I think. But But the question is, what's the future of the Labour Party? What does it stand for? I mean, nobody knows what it stands for. It doesn't have an ideology anymore. Is it kind of a new reheated Blairism, or is it something sort of centre-middle? It's sort of blancmange, and it certainly isn't a party for the working class that it used to claim to be. And so I think that, for me, always the best thing would be that we need an opposition, but it needs to be something away from the zombie party of the Labour Party.
Well, we'll get more reaction from you, Ella, as the show goes on. Just after the break, we are, should the West seek to cripple the Russian military permanently? At the end of the show, we bring you some of the curious stories that you might have missed. But first, it's the headlines. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's 3:33. I'm Miranda Shunker in the GB newsroom. NATO's Secretary-General says Turkey isn't looking to block Finland and Sweden's plans to join the alliance, and he's confident an agreement can be reached. His comments follow Finland confirming it will apply for NATO membership. That's despite President Putin warning it would be a mistake. Jens Stoltenberg also believes Ukraine can win the war against Russia.
Russia's war in Ukraine is not going as Moscow had planned. They failed to take Kiev. They are pulling back from around Kharkiv. But Ukraine stands. NATO is stronger than ever. Europe and North America are solidly united. Ukraine can win this war.
Well, meanwhile, new video released by a pro-Russian separatist commander shows a shower of munitions falling over the Azovstal steelworks in the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol. It's not clear when the footage was taken. Ukraine says the site, where a few hundred fighters have been holed up, is being constantly bombarded. Nearly 8,000 people have crossed the Channel and entered the UK this year. The latest Ministry of Defence figures show 13 boats carrying 167 people were intercepted yesterday. The Home Office is warning asylum seekers they could be flown to Rwanda under its new resettlement scheme, with flights expected to start in the coming months. And British mountaineer Kenton Cool has successfully completed his record-breaking 16th summit of Mount Everest. The 48-year-old reached the summit overnight, marking the highest number of climbs by a non-Sherpa. Well, you're up to date for now, but plenty more on all the main news stories at the top of the next hour. Though stay with us. We'll be back to Inaya and the discussion in just a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the discussion. Just before the break, we were talking about Keir Starmer, and before that, we were talking about the future of the Union in light of Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, potentially scrapping parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And we're just going to read a few of your views, and there's been lots of reaction to the Northern Ireland discussion, to say the least. Many people strongly disagreeing with the idea that there should be a united Ireland. I just want to emphasise that we did attempt to get a pro-union guest, and that didn't necessarily work out. So we did want to have another perspective there on the programme. But Dawn is saying, why does the Union need any justification? Northern Ireland is and always has been part of the United Kingdom. We want the Union. We do not want to change. Many other people echoing very strong perspectives, saying that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and that should not change, and the Union doesn't need a justification for what it stands for. It is something that should continue and it's not up for debate. So it's very interesting, very strong pro-union perspectives, undoubtedly, across GB Views. And please keep your views coming in. We also have many views on the subject of Keir Starmer as well. Dawn says, we know exactly what Labour is now. It's gone full woke and doesn't know what a woman is. No political party is viable for any of us. Paul is also talking about the fact that Keir Starmer was part of the architecture of the second referendum campaign, and he's very much betrayed people in that subject too. And David is also talking about the fact that Starmer hasn't resigned and practically should resign, and that he is a hypocrite. Any thoughts from you, Ella, in reaction to some of those GB views?
Well, just on the issue of Northern Ireland, I mean, there's the whole thing that I think those of us who want a united Ireland have always said is not that it should be imposed, but that there should be a debate. And I think everything in politics, as you know, on this free speech channel, GB News, all the viewers would hopefully agree, should be up for debate, particularly something that, if you're coming from an Irish citizen's perspective, you know, it's slightly historically illiterate to suggest that Northern Ireland has always been a part of the United Kingdom. In fact, it only has really quite recently.
You understand what they're saying, in the sense that when we think about the United Kingdom, people think about Northern Ireland included in that. It's not something separate.
At the moment, it's not something separate at all, and that's why the protocol is such a terrible thing for democracy, because essentially it is saying that the Union is null and void if the European Union suggests it should be. So I'm I'm actually completely in agreement with unionists when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. But you know, the elephant in the room in the discussion of democracy is the fact of the imposition of the British state in the island of Ireland, which those of us who have argued for sovereignty for Irish citizens in a united Ireland have always said is the problem.
Unionists would disagree that it's an imposition.
Yeah, they would disagree that it's an imposition, in the same way that during the Brexit referendum, lots of the Remainers and those within the European Union disagreed with the idea that the European Union was an undemocratic imposition in Britain. We had that debate, and as it happened, reason and truth and political arguments won out in favour of Brexit. Let's have that same debate in relation to Ireland.
Well, I'm sure that this conversation will continue to go on, and GB News we will bring you more as the story develops. Now, in other news, for this week's edition of Moral Dilemmas, we will discuss the moral questions raised by current events. Russia continues to wage its war of aggression against Ukraine. Many observers are asking how and whether Russia can be prevented from taking such actions again in the future, such as potentially destroying their military capabilities. But others argue that this is a step too far, potentially igniting something far, far worse potentially in the future. Well, I'm joined in the studio, and I'm delighted to be joined actually by James Woodhouse, visiting professor of London South Bank University, to discuss this issue. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I mean, the first question I want to ask you is, what do you make of those who suggest that we should be going far, far further than just sending weapons to Ukraine, that actually what Russia has done has fundamentally changed the game in terms of, in ramping up escalation to such an extent where the West should consider whether or not they should take action to prevent Russia from doing anything like that again?
Well, Russia has changed the game, Inaya. That's indisputable. But I think when we look at the statements of Lloyd Austin, the US Secretary for Defense, that he wants Russia weakened so it can't quickly reproduce its forces, it's all very well But it goes much further than the self-determination of Ukraine. That's what I'm here to defend, that it's a nation, it's got rights, the invasion was outrageous, and so on. That's one thing. To say that you're going to stop Russia from doing anything like this in the future indicates, to me, a great amount of bombast.
Well, but bombast, but you know, if you look at some of the statements that have come out of the Kremlin recently, I mean, threats of nuclear escalation. I mean, we've also had Finland and other countries such as Sweden that previously were neutral, effectively in fear now to such an extent of perhaps future Russian aggression against their own state that they are now joining NATO, or at least wanting to join NATO. We've had this announcement today that that is the intention of Finland. So in that sense, can you really say that it's bombast in comparison to such strong statements and actions, actually, by the Russian regime?
We can't determine our policy by what Putin says or his
representatives. Their actions, I mean.
Yeah, but you know, the point is that if you want to dismember Russia, you've first of all got to have the capability. Second of all, you've got to have the domestic support. Third of all, you've got to know how you would end it all. And right now, if you want to do that, you know, at a moment when, as one of your correspondents just pointed out, when Keir Starmer doesn't know what a woman is, when Boris Johnson is very, very unpopular and has mishandled just about everything, including Ireland now, which is a very serious thing, Putin reads the papers. He knows about the failed withdrawal from Afghanistan that Biden conducted. And therefore, it is bombast to say, oh no, we're going to make sure that Russia never does this again. It fails to distinguish between the Kremlin, which is despicable, and the Russian people who may support the Kremlin at the moment. But, you know, if you want to prize them away from the Kremlin, then making such threats, as Austin did, is exactly the way not to do it.
No, but does that not assume that it's really Putin the problem? That actually only if you got rid of Putin, there was a kind of benevolent leader, that the Russian people would just go along with them? I mean, that doesn't seem to be the case. There seems to be, you know, structural problems within Russia,
of course,
which seems to make figures like Putin more likely.
Of course, and, you know, it's very wrong to join in the general trend to personalise politics, whether it's about Boris or about Putin.
But isn't that then what the Western nations, therefore, are fearful of? That actually, even if Putin went, he was removed in some way or another, that actually he would then be replaced by potentially someone that has a stronger grievance?
Of course, that's true, but what we're failing to do is uphold Ukraine's right for self-determination. That's the struggle of the moment. Now, if you want to dismember Russia, you want to force it to pay reparations, you want to take all its minerals away, you want to reduce its armed forces and so on, well, go right ahead, if you can do it. I don't believe they can do it. And they might... Can I just finish? They might kind of factor in, you know, a little country called China and another one called India and all the support that Russia has. So, you know, it's enormously grandiose. It neglects the fact that the West is in deep trouble itself. You know, let's wait till autumn. Let's have a look at the cost of living crisis. A war's going to be with Russia is just what the population wants.
But isn't that a different question, whether or not we have the capability to do it or whether or not we should from a moral perspective?
Well, one of the things about morality is you don't issue idle threats, right? You don't say, you know, we're going to make sure that Russia can never do this again. Well, how long is forever, you know, right? They can't do that. I was just reading, it was very interesting, in a queer website, their defence of the US Air Force decision to relocate trans Air Force families away from transphobic states. In other words, if you're in, I don't know, Mississippi or Birmingham, Alabama, and you're working for the USAF and you're trans, then the government there will allow you to move somewhere else. Now, is that the kind of pressure that Putin respects? Is it the kind of pressure that America can bring to bear with its US Air Force? Is it able to do things? I don't believe it is.
But then on that question, in terms of missing, is Ukrainian sovereignty missing from the conversation? But I guess the counter-argument to that is that in order to defend the principle of sovereignty more broadly, that we cannot necessarily coexist with a regime that is willing to violate it so grotesquely and provocatively in the way that Russia has. So that in that sense, this is actually, some people might argue, a way to defend sovereignty as a principle, to make sure that regimes that are hostile to it know that they cannot go around doing what they're doing.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the West is that interested in Ukrainian sovereignty. You know, it's promised NATO and EU membership for years, never delivered it. Doors always been shut. If anything, it seems like it would quite like to prolong the war and everything.
What makes you say that there are some that want to prolong the war?
Well, because, you know, it doesn't know whether it's coming or going. You know, it would like to wear down the Russian forces and you know, it completely exaggerates just how defeated Putin is. I hate Putin and I hate the whole oligarchy. That's one thing. To imagine that, you know, everything's going swimmingly, as more and more defence correspondents and experts say, is quite wrong. It's very dangerous, the situation.
But isn't it Russia, Putin's regime, that has fundamentally been the one that has escalated this to such a huge extent?
Yes, that's one thing. But to cripple Russia, as the question
But is that not a consequence of their grotesque and unjustified and unprovoked war of aggression?
Well, you know, you've got to make sure that Ukraine comes out of this on top, and that Ukraine wins, right? If you want to embark on a whole, you know, in a different period, Operation Barbarossa without Adolf, but with China and India in the whole thing, and you believe you can get away with that with Biden and Boris and Macron.
But isn't it bigger than them? Isn't it bigger than them? Isn't it preventing this for future generations or future leaders?
Yeah, but when you're issuing a threat, they're the people in charge right now. Boris might go tomorrow. Biden might die tomorrow. But that doesn't prevent the fact that it's totally immoral and irresponsible to kind of hint at a march on Moscow or to, you know, provoke Putin further. I want him completely expelled from Ukraine. That's one thing. If Finland and Sweden want to join NATO, that's fine with me. That's their right. That's what self-determination means. But, you know, if you want a Eurasian war, which is where Austin is headed, I can't be on that bus.
Final question. So what do we do then? Do we continue to send weapons into Ukraine, and we don't know how long this war will continue? Do we need a kind of Marshall Plan type effort, to which some people are talking about, in order to rebuild Ukraine, in order to send that kind of message? And then there are others that are saying that we need to operate in the context of political realism and actually concede some of Russia's demands in terms of demanding Ukrainian neutrality, or asking of them to maintain that position, and potentially even sacrificing some regions in the east. I mean, what do you think?
No, I wouldn't do that. You know, Ukraine must determine what its needs are. It is not for us, and ministers say this, but they don't do it. It is not for us to determine, oh, well, look, you know, lose Crimea, have half of the Donbass.
But we could say,
neutral.
well, we're not going to allow you to join NATO and the EU. We could theoretically say that.
Yeah, but it's their decision. It's not our decision. You know, this imperial mentality is not confined to Putin, right? We've got it, big time. And our whole attitude to Ukraine has been thoroughly patronising. So we can talk about reparations and so on, or a Marshall Plan. Do we have the money for a Marshall Plan? Did we learn anything from the Treaty of Versailles in the First World War? It's very different. But before you rush to acquire all the stuff that Putin and his clique have stolen from the Russian people, what about the Russian people in this? Isn't it their money? Or is it Putin's money now, and therefore we'll take it? It's their money. He stole it. Therefore, we need a broader and a longer view of the situation, and not just to issue vulgar media threats in the manner of the US Defence Secretary.
Well, thank you so much, James Woodhausen, visiting professor at London South Bank University. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts this afternoon. Now, in today's final segment, we take a look at some of the stories that you might have missed and get some reaction from Ella Whelan, who is still in the studio with me. Let's start with Shanghai. Shanghai residents have clashed with China's COVID enforcers once again over harsh measures as China's zero COVID strategy continues. I mean, what do you make of the continuation of these kind of COVID maximalist policies of Shanghai? I mean, one of the things that we talked about in a previous programme on this show was that there has been almost a kind of deafening silence amongst, you know, Western political elites over China's actions. I mean, do you just think that we should just ignore it?
No, I don't think we should ignore it. I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about sliding scales in politics, and people have a sort of sense of lots of things being on a certain spectrum. One of the awkward things about the West's response or lack of response to China, and I'm not saying they should get involved and try and stop China from doing things, but even lack of expression of solidarity with Chinese citizens, is that we were not doing what is happening at the moment in Shanghai. We were not battering people back into their homes and knocking old ladies over in the street, and we didn't quite get there. And it's very extreme what's happening there. But we did implement extreme restrictions on civil liberties. And there has always long been a sense in which the West can often look to China and say, look how terrible things are over there. They don't like freedom, while at the same time not exactly being freedom lovers ourselves within our own nation. So there's this sticky position where it's a bit like you can't throw stones in glass houses. But I think it is important to, when things like this happen, recognise the importance and the power of freedom and stand up in solidarity with those Chinese citizens who are being treated so appallingly.
Indeed. Well, back here in the UK, Priti Patel has blamed specialist lawyers, in her words, over delays in implementing the government's plan to send men who arrive in the UK without authorisation to Rwanda. I mean, what do you make of this, Ella? I mean, is this surprising? I mean, a lot of people were saying that the plan wouldn't work and that there were some people just saying, well, this is great, it's a deterrent for people that are taking small boats, but perhaps, the chicken's coming home to roost, that actually perhaps it wasn't right in the first place and it also may not work anyway.
I'm not a fan of the policy in Rwanda simply because I don't think trading on immigration, mixing trade agreements and immigration is a good thing, or indeed I don't think that exporting out your problems or or the challenges you face with immigration to other countries is ever a good thing. I disagree. It's part of the reason why I was so strongly against the European Union in the Brexit referendum was because of their immigration policies, which this Rwanda policy is basically a version of a copy and paste. But that being said, it's quite obvious to me that the government must have known that lawyers were going to get involved with this, as they always do. And that's what lawyers do, and, that's their job. But it is a problem if a government, a supposedly sovereign government, can, as much as I might dislike the policy, cannot make decisions in relation to its own laws and borders, this thing we were meant to be able to do post-Brexit, without getting tied up in kind of legal battles that could last years. I think this policy should be fought on political grounds for an argument that's pro-immigration that I would very much like to make and make strongly, not tied up in courts for years.
And just quick reaction to a story by Sadiq Khan recently. He announced that he wants to support a campaign to decriminalise cannabis in the UK following him visiting a cannabis farm in LA. I mean, what do you make of that? Do you think that it should be legalised?
I have to say it's so lame when politicians go to these cannabis farms in America and they kind of, they do these documentaries. It was really cringy. It's like watching your dad go and do it. But broadly on drug policy, I do think that a policy of decriminalisation is the way to go because I have very strong views on people's ability to make decisions for themselves. I don't think if we lifted rules on cannabis, everyone would suddenly become dope heads. People are smarter than that. And indeed, it would perhaps open up some room for manoeuvring in relation to crime and drug crime. Yeah. So I'm loath to agree with Sadiq Khan, but I think he might be onto something for this, even if it's for the wrong reasons and his own narcissistic ventures into LA.
Well, thank you so much, Ella Whelan, for joining me across the programme. That was Ella Whelan, commentator and journalist. Thank you so much. Well, that's all from us on The Discussion. See you at the same time next week. Up next is Nana Queer. Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy at times. Let's have a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and it'll be a mostly dry evening with plenty of warm, sunny spells, although cloudier in the east where an odd, sharp shower is possible. The southeast will be rather cloudy and feel warm and muggy. There'll be a few showers with further heavy, thundery ones arriving from the south. South Wales will be cloudy with outbreaks of showery rain turning heavy at times. It'll feel rather muggy with some hill fog likely. It's a similar story across the Midlands as we end the day, a rather cloudy picture with showers which could be heavy at times. Muggy here with some murky conditions over the hills. The northeast of England will end the day mostly dry but also rather cloudy. There will be some bright or sunny spells and an isolated shower is also possible towards the south. Little changes as we head north to southern Scotland. It remains mostly dry but rather cloudy. The odd shower is possible along with some brighter spells.